Hey, hello. Haven't made a video in a while, and I've had some personal conflict in my life last year and a half, I guess, and it's really got me to think about something in the Bible. Pilate, he said, "What is truth?" And you know, the Bible says that Jesus is the truth and the light and the way, all that stuff. But really, it sounds good and it sounds philosophical, but it really is not an answer. So we go back to the age old question, what is truth? If you look at the world from an atheistic standpoint, in other words, there is no God, then there is no right and wrong. And there really is no truth. You can have facts, but truth is based on facts and it's really subjective. And it just depends on your mindset, really, of how you think. Um, Ultimately, if you look at war is two parties that cannot come to a resolve. Both think they're right, both think the other is wrong. And oftentimes, we talk about irreconcilable differences when it comes to marriage. Sometimes there is continual harm, things said, maybe abuse, physical abuse, whatever. But ultimately, what ends up happening is the offender or perceived offender continually, they don't see anything wrong with what they're doing, and so they continue the behavior. And for whatever reason, the other party in the relationship, they their trigger gets shorter and shorter because it's repeated abuses over a period of time, and they just snap. They can't take it no more. This happens in relationships such as marriage, friendships, work, politics, nation relationships, where it goes on all different levels. So it's kind of a universal thing, and it really boils down to what is truth. And you can talk to people and you can point out what you perceive as a fault, and really that's subjective because it depends on what the majority perceives. That's why we have judges. Two people have irreconcilable differences between themselves, and so they go to court and they stand before a judge, and a judge decides. Now, that judge may or may not be right. It just depends on the culture at the time, the judge's beliefs, his base fundamental beliefs about right and wrong, about religion, God, whether he's a socialist or a capitalist. All these things come into play with a final decision. So, what am I trying to get at today? The Bible has many valuable insights to life, but there are some things that it just does not deal with very well. It's very poorly written as an instruction manual, I guess is what I'm saying. And in one of those areas is irreconcilable differences, problems, interrelationship dynamics. Yes. So, how do you deal with that? And how does it apply to being a Christian or an atheist, really? In Christianity, for example, and there's other religions that has the same effect. Christianity is probably the most divided religion on the planet. Um, since the Reformation, it has been nothing but a spirit of division. And, now we have two camps essentially, Protestants and the Catholic Church. And amongst the Protestants, there is an innumerable amount of different beliefs and views. So, how does Christianity deal with irreconcilable differences? They just create a new camp. And those that believe like they do stay in their camp, and those that believe like somebody else stay in that camp. And that's how it's dealt with in the Christian church. States. I mean, how did we get the United States? A bunch of states. It really boils down to people with different beliefs. They tend to congregate in the same areas, and they create laws that they think are just and right and good. That's part of the problem with a direct democracy is it ends up majority rule, and so like we see in like the recent elections, you can have from a land coverage perspective, the majority of the country votes Republican, the majority. From a land use standpoint, we tend to find that larger metropolitan areas tend to vote Democrat. They're also some of the highest taxed Democrat places are usually very highly taxed, highly regulated. California is getting to be ridiculous, and the sad part is like New York and California, for example, people are fleeing the state because they don't like how draconian it's becoming, and yet these people that flee to other states vote the same bungholes right back in to the new state they're in, and they can't put two and two together. So you know it wasn't meant to be political, it's just kind of an observation. So anyways, how do you deal with what is truth? And the answer is history. You just really you try and get along, and when you can't get along, you just part ways, or you stay in your own corners, really. I know that doesn't sound very Christian, but that's really the only practical way of doing things. And one of the most 70 times 7 is probably used so often in forgiving people, and it's 70 times 7. But what people fail to bring up is the rest of it. And if your brother offends you, you're supposed to go, or trespasses against you, you're supposed to go to him and rebuke him. And if he hears you, you've gained a brother. If he doesn't hear you, you're supposed to take somebody else with you, and then a few other people. And in order to do that, you got to be able to tell people what's going on, or your side of the story, or whatever, for them to even care to come along. And so, people say, "Oh, you shouldn't speak bad about people or gossip or whatever, talk behind people's back." How do you get other people to come along? Obviously, you're going to interject them into your personal problem. And anyways, but it says if this offending person fails to hear them, you're supposed to take him before the church. Well, now you're airing your dirty laundry in front of everybody. And it says if they refuse to hear the church, then you're supposed to treat them like a heathen and a publican tax collector. So there does come a point when you just stop interacting with people, which it's sad, but I mean, people don't think about that other half, and it really sucks, but that's just the way it is. But it brings it back down to what is truth. If we don't have a standard for right and wrong, for proper and improper behavior, then everything is just totally subjective. It's he said, she said, blah, blah, blah. How do we determine who's right and who's wrong? And one of my biggest struggles with lately, the last several years, is the law. The church flat out has rejected the law. They reject some of the big things they reject are like polygamy, slavery, killing disobedient children, sex slaves from prisoners of war, the treatment of women. There's just some of the big hot buttons. And the thing is if you say that the law was to the Jews, or that was to that time period or whatever, what you're really saying is there is no objective laws. There's just subjective laws, which means that the law was only to the Jews. That's subjective. They're not to you. See, that's subjective, and it creates a moving, evolving, changing standard. And I really struggle with that because I get right on the borderline of just throwing the Bible away and throwing us all in the garbage. And atheism does make the most sense, or a godless world does make the most sense. All the human behavior, all the species, everything eats each other. It explains the motive behind polygamy, for example, or genocide. In a godless world, it makes perfect sense because everything within a species is competing to be the dominant entity in that species. And that's something that people, especially atheists, tend to want to ignore. They try to promote morality without God, and really it's stupid. There's no justification for it. Just because people like you or you get along with people, from a evolutionary standpoint, natural selection, it is stupid. You should be spreading your ideas, your seed, your influence. You should be attempting to be the most dominant in your species. And that's not what atheists demonstrate. In fact, most atheists boast about the fact that they don't want to bring children into this world because it sucks so bad, which is the opposite behavior you'd expect in a godless society. So, anyways, what is truth? Man, if you don't have a standard for truth, you get exactly what you're getting right now, and that's chaos in the world. Opposing, you got infighting within families, you got infighting within cities, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, Democrat, Republican. Things are boiling to a head, and there's going to be a shitstorm coming. So, in an attempt to not get wrapped up, you're gonna get pulled to one side or the other, whether you like it or not, because people are gonna force you into that. The question is, what are you willing to fight for? What is truth? See if you can answer that question. What is truth? How do you determine who's right, who's wrong, what's good, what's bad? If we eliminate the law as the standard of righteousness, and we say that doesn't apply to us, then all the laws then become subjective. And the question becomes, is Joseph Smith wrong? Is Muhammad was Muhammad wrong?